and welcome back. My name is Hawk, and today we are going to be doing a breakdown of the Star Wars main title theme, composed by John Williams. I released a recreation of this theme a week ago on last Wednesday, and I would like to walk you guys through how this piece was composed, what makes it so iconic, and a lot of the techniques that were used in the creation of this piece. A lot of composers, especially myself, when you're first starting out, you start getting into music theory, and a lot of people fall into this kind of trap where you are put under the impression that only really, really complex music theory will make a track very iconic and very, very interesting. This is not the case, especially once you get into the harmony breakdown of this piece. I was blown away by actually how simple the harmony was, and yet the track itself is so iconic, anyone can remember it. The melodies, the themes, they're all very, very well thought out and very, very simple once you get into it. We are going to listen to the piece first, and we're going to kind of get an ear for what's happening, and then I'm going to walk you guys through all the individual sections. We're going to explore the overall general harmony first, and then we're going to go into kind of how the strings are played out and written, how the woodwinds are written, how the brass is written, and how the percussion helps accentuate everything. There are a lot of small intricacies that aren't necessarily harmony related, and they're more orchestration related. This particular piece was written to embody an entire movie, but when you get into it and we start examining the harmony here, you will find out that it is actually very, very simple. Writing out this recreation took me over a week, and I was blown away at the complexity of everything that was put into it, aside from the harmony, because, again, it's not the harmony that matters, really. I mean, it matters in the sense of mood, emotion, and all that, but the chord choice and everything was very, very simple and well thought out, and I have to say that coming from the perspective that I'm in, I would have thought it to have been a lot more complex, as a lot of newer composers would. Now I'm going to pull up all the MIDI here so that we can look at it all as the piece is getting played out, and we're going to get right into it. That has to be one of the most iconic pieces of music that has ever been written for film. And you can see why. If you like Star Wars, you know this track. If you've even heard of Star Wars, you know this track. Now, we're going to go over some of the overall harmony choices and writing techniques that were used for this. Now, one of the things I want to express before we get into all that is I have actually exported just a quick WAV file of this and brought it into the top of the session right here. I want to just point out that the dynamics of the overall track were very, very well planned. For a piece such as this one, where you're writing to embody an entire film, you have to be able to tell a little bit of the story throughout each note of the piece. And this was noted when they thought of the dynamics to put in. You can notice that the very beginning, when you're just starting into the story, it's very strong and very powerful, right? It's very loud. You have this big horn intro, big everything, massive, and it keeps going and it just gets bigger later on. And then it gets a bit smoother, it gets a bit softer, but it's still very loud, very pronounced. But you'll notice that the section actually has a lot of different dynamic areas in it. It has lots of quieter sections, such as this bit here, which is a bit of an intermission. And then it builds up, it gets louder, the dissonances are very pronounced. It tells you that the tension is building and you have this big event happening next, and then it goes back into its main themes. This happens again over here. But instead of getting dark, it's all of a sudden very light. It's very romantic. Right? It embodies the heroics, the romances, the evil, the fighting, the conflict. It embodies all of it in 5.5 minutes, which is all I think this track is in terms of length. And this is done because they orchestrated it so that the dynamics would reflect each section. You'll notice that this piece here, it's a lot quieter, noticeably, than the bigger themes, such as here. And even much less quieter and much softer than over here. This may sound like something very obvious, but a lot of people overlook these small facts and small details that will make something more reminiscent of the emotion that you're wishing to portray. And the dynamics in the orchestration are part of that. Now we're going to get into the overall harmony of this track and the choices that were made to orchestrate it out. And we're going to start where everything should start, at the very beginning. You're going to have to ignore some of these sharps because any DAW will not write flats in its MIDI. It will only write sharps. This is not an A sharp. This is, in all sense of harmony, a B flat. Now that very iconic sound that you are hearing at the beginning of any Star Wars movie, this track starting, is just a really, really massive B flat major chord. And if I actually get a piano here and record this, I have a B flat major here and a B flat major on the keyboard. Right? It's the same harmony. This intro section where it's doing the build up and it has this sound. The entire thing is reflecting a harmony of that B flat major chord. It has some dissonances where it goes from representing a regular B flat major to actually representing chords more similar to a B flat minor, or you can see we have a G sharp in there, so that would be add sixth. Or sorry, that would be add 7, actually. It's a flattened 7th. And as you can hear, that's a very jazzy chord, and yet it's still reminiscent of the B flat major section. Now you can't hear the entirety of that very, very jazzy sound in that because of the way it was written out. That wasn't the overall harmony that was being reflected, because a lot of these G's are actually just really short notes, and they're actually only there for a little second before it goes back. And then you have these big woodwind rise up where he actually switches from doing the B flat major harmony down to F major. You can hear this transition happen very nicely into the next section, where he goes from B flat major to F major, and then he just has these really, really big B flat sounds. Right, so he basically goes B flat major, F, back to B flat major, which is reflected in the harmony below. Overall, this entire song centers around the harmony of one chord, and that is that B flat major chord. Now that would be the first theme of the track. The very first theme that you hear, it's the melodic theme of the entire universe. And as you can see, it is still B flat, D, and then we have an F in there as well, so B flat major. Now it also has these dissonances in there. We have a D in there, we have some E flats, and then some E's. These are very interesting, these dissonances, because they're melodic, but they're also harmonic. And he's using those dissonances in a rhythmic way to push the track forward. Now, if you tried to use these in just a regular chord way, it sounds like that. Very, very dark, right? But the way it's orchestrated here, it's not dark at all. And that is because of how it was orchestrated and not necessarily because of how the chord was chosen. Overall, the entire main theme, even if you scroll further up into the higher registers, is focused on that B flat major chord. We have B flat major, and then we have a B flat minor, and then we actually have that chord right there. And I wouldn't know what to call this chord other than a B flat sus2. And again, it's reflecting that B flat chord, and then it switches into this really, really huge major chord, the G. And it just orchestrates it across multiple octaves, and you get this really, really big major sound. Going into his second section, the second theme, you notice that he has some transitional notes here. Again, reminiscent of that B flat major key and that B flat major chord. He goes from these huge B flat major runs with some dissonances in there, and some runs down, to having these G chords. Now, so this could actually be classified as a flat major. And then he goes from that down to G, up again, to F. Now, this doesn't necessarily fit inside the key, what he's doing here, especially with all these small dissonances and all these runs and walks down. You can see we have lots of sharps and flats happening in just this small section. But how does it sound? And then we're back into this really, really big area. Now, here, in his second theme, he focuses more on the E flat major instead of the B flat major that was used for his A theme. So the B theme actually focuses more on a different harmony, and it's a completely different story. And that transition there is another reason that harmony, the theory that they teach you in like harmony school and stuff, once you learn it, you can manipulate it in almost any way you want. His theme here, his B theme, if you just look at this, what is happening here? It is a crazy amount of notes all packed together, and the only reason it sounds the way it does is because of how they've orchestrated it and how they've written it out. These lines are constantly moving up and down, and the instruments themselves are each telling a different story than the one beside them, but they are all meshed together. And if I were to play this on a piano, you would get... Let's just see. That's when I'm getting the notes played just right here. But it's how it's written out that really breaks down how it sounds. And then he has some nice harmony runs down. I believe he's going down in thirds. And then he goes back down to one of the other chords that's very prominent in this track, his F major. And now we're back into our A theme, which sounds a lot different because he's taken out a lot of the really, really big harmony that was there when we were first exploring the A theme. And instead, he's included a lot of these runs that are woodwinds or strings, or both, that give the track. Now, before we get into the next section, I would once more like to just state the harmony here is so simple. It's another B flat major chord going to these other similar chords. It's got B flat major here, B flat major, I believe here. So he goes from, when you're looking at this, he just goes from B flat major to an E flat chord. It's actually just got a bit of a sus4 on it. B, D, that's another B flat major chord, back to your sus4 E flat, and back to your B flat major. It's not a lot of complex harmony, And then he goes to this big build, right? Now this build, if you notice, all the notes are the same. You got C, D, F, A, D. You got a G up here, which is also down here. He's not necessarily changing the chord. He's changing the octaves that they're registered in, and he's adding instruments in, and he's growing it. He's not changing it. He's growing it. And then you move into this much quieter section, much more calmer, but it also is a bit darker, right? You have this really big dissonant chord here. Now, at this stage in the game, the story that the track is telling has completely changed. And notice how smoothly that transitioned from here to this more dissonant section. He had this big build up and he had these big runs coming in, but before he brought in his huge dissonances and his, I would call it a key change, or at the very least a modal borrowing, he got rid of a lot of his faster notes and his big brassy notes, and now instead he has these more softer strings, brass, and winds. It's got this very soft woodwind melody here. This chord right here is very reminiscent of the themes that we've already heard him play. And that chord is another B flat major. So you can see how the melody and the harmony are kind of meshed together. You hear this and you think, oh, we're going back to the big heroic theme. For just that split second, you're like, oh, we're out of the darkness. And then all of a sudden the darkness got a lot stronger. He's brought back in the big brass, the big runs, and these heavy dissonances. And the changes in those dissonances are what drive this forward even more. And now, instead of bringing back the same chord as always, he's just brought back the rhythm. It's the same rhythm we heard back, was it here? Right? Same rhythm. But he's changed the chord. So you think, oh, maybe we're getting closer again finally. But it's a different chord, so you're like, oh, it changes the mood, it changes the setting, right? Now, I'm not going to walk us through the whole harmony of this. I'm going to include the MIDI information that you can import into your own session in the description below that you can use. I'm probably going to stop the main description there. We're just going to give a quick overview of how all of these different sections interconnect and what gives each section its own feeling through that. But before we do that, please download the MIDI information and study it if you have any inclination for musical writing, or at the very least just studying how pieces like this were put together. It is a huge resource. I highly recommend you guys download it and try it out. Or at least if you think I missed something, comment it down below and I'll try and include it for the next track. Now, we're going to get out of the main harmony here. We're going to start with the strings, because the strings are the I'd have to say the backbone of most orchestral tracks, just because they're the most common section to be used. They emphasize pretty much everything, and they can express pretty much any emotion on the planet, given that you have the correct library for what you are trying to express. The library I'm using for this piece consists mainly of Majestica by 8DO, and I'm using a few of the Contact stock libraries for some of the more specific percussion instruments, such as the glockenspiel or the triangle, and the cymbals, the pietis. I probably butchered how that's pronounced, but all the bigger percussion, the timpanis, the tams, and the snare drum are all part of the Majestica percussion. Now, looking at this, you can see already it forms the biggest backbone of your track because it doesn't really stop anywhere. You can see on a lot of the other instruments that the brass actually has sections where it's completely gone, and they correlate to the sections that are quieter. And the woodwinds are actually more emphasized in these quieter sections because the woodwinds are typically instruments that will emphasize a softer emotion. They are very, very good at bringing out that softer quality and helping you with those low dynamic sections. The strings, however, pretty much never disappear. They will have sections where the lower sections are cut out, and instead of them completely disappearing, you have just one instrument playing, such as here. Right? You have this in the background. Very quiet. We can hear how it's giving out that dissonance and helping push that darker section forward. We also have the strings representing most of the main harmonies of your track, as well as a lot of your low and high end runs throughout the entire piece, and all of these faster harmonies like these runs right here. You can see how the brass is the main focus of that section when you hear it. But if you play that section without the strings, you will hear a drastic change. It will not sound anywhere near the same. You wouldn't even be able to replicate this effect if you put in a brass run there, because it would change the entire tonality of the section. The strings are an instrument section of the orchestra that I would say are the backbone of pretty much anything, especially in a larger track like this that has the full orchestra in it. Very useful tools for both emphasizing and underlining certain things. They can be the forefront or they can be in the back, as is very well demonstrated in this piece when he goes to his beat. You can hear how the brass is still up front in there, but the strings have taken control of the melody as well as the majority of the harmony and are adding their strength together with the rest of the instruments. And this is also very noticeable at the very end, where you have the big, big brass ending that is represented in this track. Now, the brass is the most noticeable instrument, but without the woodwinds and the strings in there, it would not be nearly as powerful. It would just sound like brass. It wouldn't really sound big. Now, the woodwinds are doing their own little thing. They are both harmony-based and run-based, I would say, for this. There aren't a lot of really, really long notes. You can see there's some here, and there's a few at the end when we have that really, really big ending. But for the most part, all the notes in the woodwind are very, very, very short. They have a lot of runs. They have a lot of movement. They're very, very active. This activity is what is helping push overall the energy of the track. Especially all these up runs. These up runs are everywhere, and they are complementing everything. You have them here as well. you have them in the background emphasizing that main harmony and that melody again. They're a completely different emphasis than the strings. And while the strings, I would say, are the big body of this track, and that they are kind of the glue that's tying everything together, and you don't get a lot of woodwind notes until, or a lot of long woodwind notes until this section. The only section to include a sort of woodwind focused melody right here. Right? Very, very subtle, but very, very important. Now, I don't really feel like I need to get too much into how the brass is interacting with anything, because you can hear it very, very prominently. The brass is the forefront of this track and is the emphasis of pretty much everything, which is why he takes it out in certain sections, because once you notice the most powerful thing gone, everything else comes forward and you're like, oh, I've entered a much softer section, right? I wish I had the time to break down the overall harmony to the smallest minutia, but this is something that would take hours to study, possibly even days for this single track. So I highly recommend that you guys download the MIDI. I haven't even gotten into the percussion. Unfortunately, we just don't have the time, as this video is already much too long. But please download the MIDI, explore it, study it, understand what makes this track as good as it is. Because tools like this will help you understand how to write music in the future, how to orchestrate for the instruments that you are using. It will also help you understand how to write tracks that are a bit different from this, because once you understand those orchestration tools, you will be able to use them in all of your musical ideas and adventures. So I'm going to leave this here. There will be links to the MIDI down below. I wish I had more time to break this down better for you guys, but unfortunately that's all we've got. So I'll see you guys next Wednesday. Have a good one, and let me know what you think in the comments. Enjoy the rest of your week. Bye-bye.